Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Vision driven by Autobody News. I'm your host, Cole Strandberg. Today's guest is an automotive industry rock star focused on fixing the technician shortage, as well as the host of a very successful automotive podcast himself. Jay Goninen is the co-founder and president of WrenchWay, whose mission is to promote and improve technician careers in the automotive, diesel, and collision industries to help address the technician shortage. Jay is also the host of the Beyond the Wrench podcast, which I've been fortunate to be on. Today, we're going to talk a bit about Jay's background, starting at the shop level, what he's up to today at WrenchWay, the technician shortage, and a whole lot more. Enjoy the show.
Cole Strandberg is a principal with Focus Investment Banking. All opinions expressed by Cole and podcast guests do not reflect the views or opinions of Focus or Autobody News. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Podcast guests may have ongoing client relations with Focus Investment Banking or Autobody News. Enjoy the show.
Jay Goninen, thank you for coming here on the Collision Vision. My friend, how are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to join you as always. Always really enjoy our conversations. Looking forward to yet another one.
Likewise, man. Likewise. Listeners of the Collision Vision are going to be familiar with your voice from your interview of me on your podcast, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I've also given you a pretty high-level introduction at the top of the show, but you have a great story. You've built and are building something really special. Walk us through your background in your own words.
So I started off at the age of 9 in an independent repair shop up here in Wisconsin. My dad actually started the business, didn't have enough money to hire anybody. So it was kind of a tag team of my great grandmother and myself answering the phones and filling out deposit slips, cleaning the shop, while my dad did all of the work in the actual shop itself. And so as he got his business established, I kind of grew up in that business, and they were eventually able to afford the staff up front to be able to kind of shoulder the load up front, also hiring some techs in the backside, and we're able to get into a new building that would accommodate that many more people. So as we kind of just grew up in the business, and at some point or some level, it's kind of like we grew up together in the business, my dad and I. It was really interesting, because then I started working on cars and eventually went off to tech school to maybe learn a bit more about working on cars, and then came back and worked for him full time after that was finished up, and found out that I was not a good technician at all. And not only not a good technician, I just didn't like it, right? I didn't love being in the shop. My skill set definitely was more along the lines of working with people. And I kind of joke that the industry really put me in my place and really put me where I should have been. So went out into industry, worked for an OE for quite a while, eventually got recruited to run the parts and service departments of a dealership. And all of that time really started to learn that it wasn't just my dad's little shop in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, that had the need for finding those technicians that were out there. It was everybody. And so in 2017, launched a company called Find a Wrench. Find a Wrench, it was more along the lines of a traditional recruiter. Funny story about that is I really had no recruiting experience whatsoever other than recruiting for myself. But I do remember my dad when I was a kid saying, I can't find a damn wrench anywhere. And so that ended up being kind of a play on words that we used for the launch of the business. It started off with me in my basement, and we just kind of grew it from there and added pieces as we needed and really started to expand. I like to joke that it was probably, we grew it too fast. It was such a demand that when you're that early stage of a company, you're kind of like, yeah, let's take everybody on. And that was obviously a mistake. So as we built Find a Wrench, we started to understand that we weren't really fixing the core of the problem. The primary issue was that there wasn't enough people in the industry. And when I was growing up, there was always this unspoken rule that you didn't take technicians from the neighboring shop. And all of those rules kind of went out the window when everybody got desperate. And so we wanted to come together and figure out a way that we could not only keep experienced technicians in the industry, but then try to pull more interest from young people, whether through schools or other industries even, and really kind of shining the light on how cool these careers are and how much of a future you can have with these. So launched a technology platform called WrenchWay. Ultimately, we wanted to give a technician the ability to do their due diligence on a shop, be able to see why it's a good place to work, why it's different than maybe a shop that burned them in the past, while also kind of speaking to those schools and that younger student that might look at us, hopefully in a different light than they have in the past. So it just a quick Cliff Notes version of my story, I guess, but it has been an interesting journey to get to this point, to say the least.
A fascinating background, and it's one that we could spend the entire show talking about. I'm not going to do that to you, but we certainly could. Talk to me a little bit, though, before we move on to some broader industry topics about exactly what it is that WrenchWay does and the different offerings you have for different sectors of the automotive industry.
Yeah, to simplify it, one side is almost like a job board on steroids, right? So the pages themselves include a lot of information about a shop. We have an under the hood section that talks about 5 different categories that go into a great level of detail about that shop. My favorite question in the under the hood section, is a question that asks about side work. And so some of those elephant in the room type of questions we hope to answer up front, as well as really just kind of give a technician the ability to look at a shop, see the shop in really the almost behind the curtain type of fashion, to where you can see what's actually going on in the shop. What types of special tools do they have? We do have a video section so that if a shop wants to produce videos to be able to put out there, they're able to do that. And I think doing it in a way that's not just always saying we're hiring is a really, really important piece to that. So we've got the job board side, and then we've got the school side. And with the school side, this is the side that gets me the most excited, because this is the side that I think is really helping the industry bring more people in. And we have something called School Connect, where schools essentially go out. It's free of charge for every school, both high schools and post-secondary. And they just ask for things. So they could ask for a donation for their program, whether that's financial or maybe that used part that you no longer need that they could use as a learning aid in their schools. It could be somebody to come speak to their class. It could be whatever the school is wanting and needing at that time. And then our network of shops are able to see that request, be able to go out and answer that. And the hope is that we build bigger and better automotive, diesel, and collision programs so that there are more people coming into the industry and that we're not always so desperate to find these people. So there's that's the part that when I wake up in the morning that I get really, really excited about, because I think that's the side that where we really, really do make an impact on the industry as a whole.
That's awesome, man. And you've listened to the Collision Vision on your own podcast. It comes up all the time. I know this for a fact because I listen. The technician shortage is what everyone is talking about, and coming up with different solutions to solve that, both at the macro level and the micro level, is vital. And you guys are doing it, and it's a very cool product. Anyone not familiar, I do recommend go ahead and give WrenchWay a look. Check them out. Pivoting, kind of zooming out a little bit. What are you seeing in the technician space right now? I know all year we've talked about how the shortage is real. Any signs of that changing anytime soon?
I think there's some encouraging things happening, and I just posted about this on LinkedIn, but I had spent last week at a few different high school and post-secondary advisory committee meetings. And the one really, really encouraging piece is that there's one specifically that I'm a part of, and I've been a part of for more than 15 years, and it's a diesel one, but I think this really parlays into every other kind of advisory committee meeting, in that there's more interest in attending those meetings. And I think a lot of it comes from maybe having our backs up against the wall and knowing that we're going to have to do something different to produce more talent in the future. But in the past, we would struggle to get 10 people there, right? We would struggle, and it's kind of begging and pleading our industry peers to come to these meetings. But this last meeting I went to, and actually probably the 2 or 3 prior to that, we had 25 to 30 people in these advisory committee meetings, and all participating, not just sitting on their hands, actually giving the school feedback. And really, it felt more like a team atmosphere where we're working together to help build these programs up. So I think that aspect of it is starting to change. One of the things we just had our virtual conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the themes that I talked about over the course of the day is that we need to figure out a way to get our best and brightest to speak glowingly about the industry, because if we don't, we're essentially trying to fill a sinking boat, a boat with a lot of holes in it. And until we start to plug some of those holes, we're just going to keep trying to fill this boat, and it's just going to keep sinking and sinking and sinking. So we need to, as an industry, look at our best and brightest and figure out, how do we take care of these folks? How do we treat them so good that they won't want to leave, they won't want to go to a different industry? And I think that's a huge task. I don't think that's there's not an overnight solution to that. But I think if we start chipping away at it at each of our individual shops, we can start to make progress. And it will take a while to get to that point. But the fact of the matter is, we've got to change the way we go about this, right? We have to take care of our best, because if they're not telling that younger generation that they should be coming into this industry, we're essentially shooting ourselves in the foot over and over and over again.
There's very little room at this point for short-term solutions on the macro, but I think that's what makes this problem particularly challenging, because on one hand, you're inclined to say this is a macro problem. There's nothing that I alone can do about it. But on the other hand, you alone need to do something about it, because in the short term, right now, your shop needs talented technicians. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's some real positivity around the industry right now from every level, including the technician level. And I think giving the stars of our industry a voice, it's something you do a very good job of on your podcast, and giving some very talented technicians a real voice and allowing them to preach the virtues of the industry. But I think you did a great job kind of walking through some of the positive things that are happening on the macro. I would echo that sentiment. Just real quick, and I want to be cognizant of time, what are some tactics that at the shop level you can use to beat the technician shortage for yourself?
One, you have to start looking at it through a proactive lens. If you're just always looking for that silver bullet and not wanting to put the work in, you're just always going to be chasing your tail. And so until you actually put some priority on this, your luck is not going to change. And I've had several conversations with business leaders in our industry where I'll ask, how much time would you say you spend on staffing? Not even just recruiting, staffing in general over the course of a given month. And the typical answer I get back is about an hour. If that is one of your number one issues, and you're not doing anything to reverse your luck or change your luck, you're just going to continually find yourself in the position that you are. So one of the really, really easy things that we promote through WrenchWay, and honestly, some of it is just common sense, is have a staffing meeting once a month and talk about your current staff. Are they happy? Are they not? I used to actually use an Excel system where we would do kind of a red, yellow, green. And really, green is, good attitude. They're happy. They want to be here. They have that technical skill that we're looking for. They check all the boxes. Yellow, they're missing something, right? And that might be something we need to look a little bit more in depth at. But then that red is, whether it's from the company's eyes or the technician's eyes, something is off, and we need to fix that one way or the other. So if you have those consistent conversations month after month after month, you're going to find yourself in a better position. And at first it might be kind of awkward, because at some level you might be talking about some of your former peers in those meetings, but you have to bring attention to it. And it's really funny, because I like to say that a lot of times we say people are our number one priority, yet they fall number 100 on our to-do list. And somehow you've got to reverse course. You actually have to schedule that in, and it can't be at that meeting that is, you know what, we're busy, we can't do that meeting, we're not going to do that meeting, we'll push it off till next week. Well, next week becomes next month, which becomes next year, and it just never happens. So actually have that meeting, and I guarantee you're going to be a lot more successful than you currently are.
Well put. It's one of those things where it's sort of a long-term problem, even if there are some short-term immediate needs. If you can convince yourself of the longevity of the problem, you can very easily keep pushing it back a week and another week and another week. It's something that I do personally, not specifically as it relates to talent, but those recurring
is tough, right?
Oh, those recurring meetings that really don't have that sense of urgency. It's so tough. Real quick, talk to me about the Beyond the Wrench podcast. I know listeners here at the Collision Vision got a taste of it, but give me the 30-second elevator pitch.
Beyond the Wrench is all about trying to get our industry into a better place. And we do have the just general automotive repair folks, both at the dealership and independent side. We do have diesel folks. We have had collision. Collision is a big growing piece of our business as a whole. But it's really an hour to talk to people about how we get the industry into a better place, best practices on how others are doing it, right? And we get to, I think you and I have talked about this in the past, but the fact that we get to sit down with a really, really smart person for that long and pick their brains about things that honestly apply to any business. I've had family and friends reach out and say, hey, I know they talk about technicians, but that really plays anywhere. And I think when those of you that are in the collision side of the business can remove the fact that, hey, they're doing automotive repair, they're doing diesel, there is always something to learn out there. And we're trying to get more and more of you collision folks out there. So if any of you want to be on the podcast, feel free to reach out. I'm always glad to learn more about the collision industry as a whole.
Beyond the Wrench is a great podcast. Recommend any listeners of the Collision Vision, please do check it out. And on that note, Jay, where can people find the podcast? Where can people follow along with you and reach out to you?
You can find the podcast wherever you'd find any of your other podcasts. So Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. You can go out to WrenchWay.com. There is a podcast section that has all of our podcasts kind of laid out. And I think it links to YouTube, so you can check it out on YouTube as well. But really, anywhere that you find podcasts, you're able to hop on and see which topics are most relevant to you and hopefully learn something.
Fantastic. Well, Jay, thank you as always, man. It's always so much fun to talk to you and hear about all the great things you have going on. Today was a little bit abbreviated. I have so much more I want to talk to you about. We're going to have to make it happen soon, okay?
We'll make it happen. Thank you again for having me on.
Thanks, Jay. A sincere thank you to Jay Goninen for a great, even if brief, conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Jay's view on the industry is, in my opinion, a very cool one. It's optimistic and realistic at the same time. It's not looking at roadblocks and making excuses. It's breaking through those roadblocks. What Jay and his team are building at WrenchWay is very exciting, and I do encourage you to take a listen to Jay's podcast, Beyond the Wrench. You may even hear a familiar voice, perhaps one from your favorite Collision Vision host. And that's all for today's show. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, follow, and share the Collision Vision wherever you enjoy your podcast. And on behalf of the Auto Body News team and myself, thank you for coming along for the ride.